about the messaging, a little bit about the messaging that I do, and show you some of the student engagement. And there are obviously limitations to what I do, but my main marketing argument is that what I do is better than doing nothing. And so, I want to share with you the work that I do, but I also want to win you over as allies. I'm hoping that when we're done this morning, if you don't think that assembly-based education, if you don't think that single events have any value, that hopefully I will have changed your mind a little bit. So I'll share my screen. You are going to get my contact information, and I will answer any questions that anybody might have. So we're good to go? You can see my screen? Verna?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So I am calling the drug problem a perfect storm. And my experience traveling around the world tells me we have a pretty severe mental health crisis in our children. And we have a very, very severe drug crisis. The drugs are more powerful than ever, and that's causing very sad consequences. I show this picture in my presentations of the kids, and I say, "Who is that handsome young man?" And they stare, and then I go, "It's me," and the kids all laugh. And I use this picture to get credibility with the kids because I'm an old man, and I think many kids, when I show up to teach, they see me and they tune out. They don't think that they're going to learn anything from me. And I point out that, this problem, the drug problem, has been my life. I started as a DEA agent when I was 23, and I retired at 54 years old. For 31 years, I chased drug traffickers. After 8 years of working in California, I was sent to Bolivia, and I lived in Bolivia for 6 years, working with their national police fighting the cocaine traffickers. And when Washington, D.C. sent me to Bolivia, they said I was an American advisor helping Bolivia with Bolivia's problem. Everybody called the cocaine problem Bolivia's problem. But as I did this work for 6 years, finding and destroying the cocaine laboratories, I learned some powerful things. And when I saw this environmental catastrophe, the destruction of the natural environment of Bolivia, and the violence and the poverty and the corruption, all coming from the cocaine business, I realized something very powerful. This is not Bolivia's problem. This is the United States problem. The cocaine that was going to come from that laboratory before I burned it down was going to be sold to Americans. And the money used to build that laboratory came from the pockets of American drug buyers. Many people in America are saying we are in a fentanyl crisis. Yes, and I'll talk about fentanyl today, but it's not the only problem. These are pictures of methamphetamine. And when I started my DEA career in the United States in 1990, this drug was being manufactured by the motorcycle gangs, the Hells Angels, and in San Diego. And if I took 1 pound of methamphetamine from the drug traffickers, that was considered a significant case. 1 pound was considered a good case. But as I retired 3 years ago now, I'm seizing 100 pounds, 200 pounds, 500 pounds of this toxic poison. And the drug traffickers are laughing at us. The people that I would take to jail, they're not laughing, but their bosses, the people higher up in the drug cartels, they don't care. They just send more people and more drugs. And there's a tidal wave of this drug coming in the United States. And I'll share some headlines with where the United States is today. And it's not good. 13-year-olds, kids as young as 13 now, bringing fentanyl to school. This kid used fentanyl at his middle school and died at school. And they did a follow-up investigation, and they found he had 100 baggies of fentanyl in his bedroom and 40 baggies in a backpack at school. So we have across the country examples of kids as young as 13 now bringing the most deadly drug ever invented to their schools. In California, a 16-year-old sold fentanyl to a 12-year-old girl, and she died. And he's been charged with murder. That's extraordinary, and that's new. When I was young in California, we did not charge teenagers with murder for distributing drugs, but that's how bad the drugs are today. This is, unfortunately, is not a made-up headline. The 5-year-old who fatally shot his baby brother was on cocaine while the dead toddler had marijuana in his system. That is a real headline from the United States today. And this is a national tragedy for us. and we're not reacting. As a society and a culture, we are not reacting adequately to this problem. And then you also can add on this problem. We're legalizing marijuana across the country, and it's reckless. And I go to some high schools in California, and I start talking, or try to start talking about marijuana, and the students challenge me. And they say, Rocky, why are you talking about marijuana? It's not a drug. And they're not joking. And because we've allowed the marijuana industry, the people selling marijuana, we've allowed them to convince our kids it's not even a drug, it's natural, it's not harmful. And yet this national news story is about just my county of San Diego, and almost 40 young people a day are being taken to our hospitals in severe mental health crisis. They're seeing things, they're hearing things, they're retching, they're strapped down, and yet we're still telling our kids it's not even a drug. So there are many ways to measure the drug problem. How do we figure out how big it is? When I was in law enforcement, we would count the bodies we arrested, we would count the amount of drugs that we would seize. Another sad metric is counting people who die. And when I started my DEA career, it was about 10,000 Americans a year were dying from drugs, 10,000 a year, which I still think is a tragically big number. But today, it's not 10,000 a year, it's almost 10,000 a month. We're losing almost 10,000 Americans a month now as a consequence of what started as a choice to use drugs. Some people are dying the first time, some people die after years, but they're all dying as a consequence of that first decision to use drugs. And that's about 300 a day, every day in America. And, you know, I tell the students, and I'll tell you, that's about a dozen will die during this presentation. I mean, during this conversation with you right now, about a dozen Americans, statistically speaking, will pass away from drug abuse. But if we talk numbers with students, they don't see we're not losing numbers, we're losing beautiful people. So I created this video to show them and to show you who we're losing. And everybody in this video died from a drug overdose. Some were famous, most aren't. You'll see their name, their age, they died, and the drug or drugs that killed them. And I asked the students, as they watch this video, to ask themselves if it was worth it.
Should have stayed, were the signs I ignored. Can I help you not to hurt anymore? We saw brilliance when the world was asleep. There are things that we can have but can't keep. If they say, who cares if one more light goes out in the sky of a million stars? It flickers, flickers. Who cares when someone's time runs out? If a moment is all we are, or quicker, quicker. Who cares if one more light goes out? Well, I do. The reminders pull the floor from your feet. In the kitchen, one more chair than you need. Oh, and you're angry, and you should be. It's not fair. Just 'cause you can't see it doesn't mean it isn't there. If they say, who cares if one more light goes out in the sky of flickers, flickers. Who cares when someone's time runs out? If a moment is all we are, or quicker, quicker. Who cares if one more light goes out? Well, I do. Who cares if one more light goes out in the sky of a million stars? It flickers, flickers. Who cares when someone's time runs out? If a moment is all we are, or quicker, quicker. Who cares if one more light goes out? Well, I do. Well, I do.
So welcome to my beloved United States of America in 2024. That was about 50 souls, and we will lose 300 today and 300 tomorrow and 300 every day. And we are talking about the problem, but from my perspective, we are not implementing or even trying to implement new solutions. We are in a drug crisis, but for me, the drug crisis is the symptom. The drug crisis is not the problem, in my perspective. And we have a drug crisis because we have an enormous self-medication crisis. We have, I think globally now, I think maybe it started as an American problem, but now it's global. We have a world population that wants to self-medicate through legal or illegal drugs away from their problems. And we have a self-medication crisis because we have a mental unwellness crisis. I'm not calling it mental illness, but I think we have certainly a population in my country and in many others where people are anxious and depressed and emotionally agitated, and they're looking for escapes. And unfortunately, we have a popular culture that's telling everyone that chemicals can help them. In the United States, after COVID, the government did surveys of our youth to just check up and see what the state of the mental health was in the youth in America. And this survey horrified me, a national survey of American teenagers, and 44% said that they feel persistently sad and hopeless. And I think we're the richest country in the history of the world, the most powerful country in the history of the world at the moment. And yet almost half of the teenagers in America told us they feel sad and hopeless, persistently sad and hopeless. And I saw these headlines and I couldn't believe it. And then I said, well, okay, well, maybe this will cause a reaction. Maybe this data will cause a national conversation. And it didn't. As a culture, as a country, we just shrugged and didn't react. And yet our kids are telling us they're in trouble. And that's my takeaway from this. Our kids are telling us they're in trouble, and we're not changing how we deal with or address them. And too many people today want to put all of the blame on the cell phones and smartphones and social media. And while the technology has made problems worse, I think it's just accelerated them. I think all of these problems existed before the phones and social media, but they're just more intense now because of the phones and social media. And then this is the problem that I do know from my life's work. And you know, I would like to feel that after my 30 years of effort that we've made things better, and it's literally 10 times worse. The drugs are stronger, they're easier to get, they're cheaper, and sadly, they're more socially acceptable than ever before in the United States. And because of the geopolitical problems with Mexico and the drug cartels, I don't think we can do a whole lot about number 1, 2, and 3 right now. Law enforcement, I believe in law enforcement. I'm a law enforcement guy. But right now, law enforcement around the world is really struggling to do anything about numbers 1, 2, and 3. But if all of us in this session, all of us across the world, begin to work together to change the culture around our kids, then I think that's where we can make change happen. We're never going to arrest our way out of this. We're never going to seize all the drugs. But if we work to teach our kids to respect themselves and their bodies and their dreams, then maybe future generations of kids won't want the drugs as much. I am going to talk about opioids. I love this saying, you don't take them, they take you. And they're miracle medicines. I mean, we're lucky to live with opioids, so we don't suffer pain in medical scenarios. But even in the medical scenario, doctors have to be careful because people get addicted very, very quickly. And certainly people get addicted almost instantly if they're using these drugs for recreational purposes. And when I was young in America, this was the opioid that we worried about. And I never used drugs and I wasn't around drug people, but we all knew that heroin was a drug you did not want to start because you can't stop. But in America today, we don't have heroin anymore. Literally, I don't know there's any heroin in America. It's all been replaced by fentanyl, a synthetic opioid. Now, fentanyl causes the same high as heroin. It causes the same addiction as heroin. It's just 50 times stronger. And that tiny amount of fentanyl on that penny on the left is enough to overdose and kill me. And I weigh about 200 pounds. And fentanyl is not the scariest drug out there. Carfentanil, that tiny dot on the right penny, is enough to overdose and kill me. And it's 100 times stronger than fentanyl. Fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin, and carfentanil is 100 times stronger than fentanyl. And yet we're not reacting. Now, too many people think that this is the problem. Pharmaceutical fentanyl is a miracle drug. It's used every day across America, across the world, for surgeries, for burn treatment, for cancer treatments. Historically, we had people trying to get legal fentanyl from pharmacies to get high, but that's not the problem anymore. The problem today is the clandestinely manufactured fentanyl. And currently, most of it's being made in Mexico with chemicals from China and India. Some is being shipped directly to the US through the mail from dark web. Some is being manufactured in Canada. But most of it right now is being manufactured at industrial levels and is coming up into the United States from Mexico. It comes in two forms right now, the two main forms. And this one right now is terrifying. In America, we have allowed the pharmaceutical industry to advertise to our population directly. As a consequence, we have a population that thinks pills from pharmacies are not dangerous. And about 8 years ago now, the drug cartels in Mexico saw how much money Americans were spending on prescription drugs to abuse them. And they decided to get some of that money. But instead of getting legitimate pills from pharmacies, the drug cartels began to manufacture counterfeit pills to look like they came from pharmacies, to trick the drug users. These are pills that I seized in one of my investigations that were made in drug labs in Mexico, and we seized them at the border. These were all made from fentanyl. And these pills have been causing massive death because drug users don't realize that they might be counterfeit. They don't realize that they're dangerous. And they're dangerous because they're not being made by scientists. They're being made by idiot drug dealers. And this diagram represents that. So on the left, we have sugar, and most of what's in these pills is sugar. And the drug dealers mix in the red, the fentanyl, and they try to blend it properly, but they don't know how to do it because they're not scientists. As a consequence, some of the pills they make have none of the drug, some have enough to get people high, and some will kill anybody who takes them. And they all look exactly the same. There is no quality control, there's no testing. They're manufactured by the millions, they're shipped across the border by the millions, and then they're distributed. And the only time we find out that there is a deadly pill is when someone's calling emergency medical services. And unbelievably, I've had kids tell me they know about this in America. And they tell me when they go to a party, they watch their friends using drugs first. And how sad and cynical that is. And if they don't see their friends having an overdose, they think it's safe to use the drugs. And I have to explain that that's a bad strategy because they could see their friends using those first 4 pills at the bottom and not having any obvious problems, but they might reach in the bag and grab the last one, or their best friend, or the little brother, and they go to sleep forever. These are pills that I seized in my drug investigations. People were selling these. I was an expert for the American government. I thought these were legitimate. And yet I took them to our laboratory for analysis, and we discovered it's all fentanyl. And the reality today is that every single pill that's for sale illegally in America on the internet, or that shows up at the parties today, 100% of them are fentanyl, fakes made from fentanyl. The first investigation I did was in 2016, and 1,000 pills at a time were being hidden in these blankets that crossed the border from Mexico into San Diego. And we seized 4,000 pills. And we were so proud of ourselves. 4,000 pills. That seemed at the time like a big investigation. But sadly, things changed. 4 years later, we were seizing more than 100,000 pills at a time, coming across the border in these cars. And now they're coming across the border by the millions. And the tragedy is, it costs the drug cartels pennies to make these. So even if we take millions of these pills from the drug cartels, we're not harming them economically. They just produce millions more to keep sending them. And ironically, 15 years ago, or more, well, about 15 years ago, Americans really moved away from the powdered street drugs, and they began to abuse prescription drugs in huge numbers because they thought the prescription drugs were safer. Now, so many people are afraid of the counterfeit fentanyl pills that they have returned to using what they think is cocaine, or they think is methamphetamine, or they think is heroin. And they buy it and they die because it was cocaine or methamphetamine blended with fentanyl, or it was just pure fentanyl. And as terrifying as the fentanyl situation is today, I am very, very frightened for what's going to be coming in the future. We already have new classes of synthetic opioids that are showing up. There's a class of drugs called the nitazines, which is very nasty and very scary. So we're not even really coming to terms in the United States with the fentanyl problem that we have in front of us. And yet the drug traffickers are already making the problem worse. So sadly, I think if we were to have this meeting again in a year or 5 years, the data is going to be even more sad than it is today. But again, it's not just fentanyl. Methamphetamine is the worst drug that I've ever seen. Now, fentanyl kills people quickly, and that's horrible. Methamphetamine kills people slowly, and it doesn't look dangerous. It comes in these crystals. To the kids, it looks inoffensive. It looks like it might be sugar or salt. Of course, the drug dealer always claims that it's safe and pure. And I teach the kids, it doesn't matter how pretty the drug looks, you're never going to know what's in it. The people giving it to you or selling it to you didn't make it. They don't know what's in it. And often the people that made it don't know what's in it. And then I cannot talk about drugs in America without talking about marijuana. We've lost our minds in this country because we legalized marijuana based on the natural marijuana. And on the left of this diagram, you see represented the level of tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, in the natural marijuana plant. And it is roughly 4%, 3 to 5% THC. That's the marijuana that my friends smoked when I was in school. That's the marijuana that Bob Marley smoked, that natural 4% plant. But in America today, the people making the marijuana are growing it. They want more profit. And so like almost every other agricultural business, they don't grow the natural plant. They grow a genetically modified hybrid plant. And in California, that plant has 25 to 30% THC in the plant, which means that a young person smoking a marijuana cigarette today is taking in 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 times as much THC as kids did back when I was young. And parents don't understand this. I mean, the adults don't understand this. When they hear marijuana, they think it's that same low percentage natural marijuana that they used when they were kids. And I think, unfortunately, we did such a good job teaching kids in America not to smoke cigarettes that many don't want to smoke the marijuana, so they use the concentrated. And these are all the concentrated forms of THC. And the people selling it give it cute names and they make it look attractive. But this stuff has a potency often of 90% or more. And in the short term, American kids are using this stuff and they're ending up in the hospital with mental health problems. Long term, we have no idea what this is doing to their development and their future health. And yet we're not addressing this properly. And we've known about the brain damage in our kids for years. This study came out in 2017 talking about developmental harm in kids from marijuana. And we're not finding the same damage in adults. But over and over and over around the world, science is discovering that marijuana, THC, is extremely harmful to the development of the youth brain. And, in the school environment and our societal environment, we're not addressing the drug problem. And it's my belief that many of the problems in our homes, our schools, our increase in youth suicide, juvenile crime, and even our homeless problem in America, which is enormous and growing, all of these problem areas are directly connected to substance abuse. And just today, I won't talk about all of them, but I will talk about the school environment. We have an enormous problem with absenteeism in America, truancy. Kids don't show up. Well, in my belief, many of those cases are because either the student is using substances or the student is coming from a home where the parents or guardians are using substances, and nobody's making the kids show up to school, and the schools are losing huge amounts of money. We have increasing learning disability in our schools. Again, from either the student using drugs or coming from a toxic environment, or the student was damaged in utero because their mother consumed alcohol or drugs before they were even born. We have increasing disciplinary issues, and we have an unsafe school environment. I visit many schools in America, and the kids tell me they won't use the bathroom at their school. In the United States of America, kids won't use the bathroom at school because that's where kids go to smoke or use marijuana or use drugs. And the kids are afraid to go to the bathroom at their school. So staring at these problems for 34 years now, since I was 23 years old, and I'm frustrated because our society, and most societies, are waiting until people get in trouble to offer them help. And I love this expression from Desmond Tutu. There comes a point where we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. And that's why I'm doing my work. Often people will ask me to talk about the drugs. They want to know what drugs kids are using. And that's important to know. My question is why? Why are kids across the planet so willing to poison themselves? Why are kids across the planet so willing to lose everything, to put these toxic chemicals in their bodies? So this is my solution. This is the program I came up with. I am not here today to sell you anything. I'm simply here to share with you a solution that I developed to try to help the kids. And if you like any part of my program, I give it away. My PowerPoint is available to any of you if you want it. At the end of my presentation, I'll put up my email. And if you'd like the presentation and you want to use pieces of it, just contact me and I'll send it to you. But my program is not just say no. I think that's a dumb expression. Nobody ever listened to it. My program is I choose my future. And I tell the kids they are going to choose their futures. I tell the kids that no one is going to give them happiness. No one's going to give them success. If they want happiness or success in life, they have to work for it and they have to make smart choices. I designed the program to show my kids how drugs would impact them, our family, our communities, our country, and the rest of the world. And that is still my message. So in the short 60 to 90 minutes that I get with students, that's what I try to do. I throw an enormous amount of information at them, and I try to show them what drugs will do to them and our society and the rest of the world with their choices. And I've been successful. I've given over 1,200 presentations now in 17 countries to over 220,000 students. And when I first started teaching internationally in 2011, I went to Colombia. And when I took my presentation to Colombia, and I speak Spanish fluently, when I went to Colombia, I was afraid the kids wouldn't understand my program, because of cultural differences, I would have to make adjustments. And I discovered I don't have to change anything. And it doesn't matter where I travel. I show up, I give my program, and the kids indicate that they appreciate and understand everything in my program. And these are just some of the images. This is some of the messaging I use with the kids. I teach them that it's going to be a choice, right? That no one's going to force them to use drugs. That happens, but statistically, the vast majority of our kids are going to be somewhere where a friend, it's not going to be some stranger, a friend is going to offer them drugs. And they're going to have to say yes or no. And I teach them some refusal skills. I tell them they can lie to the person, but I make it clear point that no one's going to force you. This is a decision that you'll make. Number two, my law number two, all users eventually experience negative consequences sooner or later. And interestingly, I use the example of alcohol. And I'll tell the kids, you know, it might be funny to be at a party with someone who's drunk at that party, but is it funny to live with an alcoholic? And it's incredible. I was in Guatemala, and half the kids, when I asked that question, is it fun living with an alcoholic? Half of the kids in my audience, their bodies kind of sank and they went, no. And indicated half of those students are living in pain from someone else's alcohol abuse. And then law number three, and maybe this is the saddest, that our kids will harm themselves. I tell them, you will harm yourself, but never just yourself. You'll harm everyone who loves you, everyone who teaches you, everyone who supports you, and you'll harm the rest of us in society through your choices. I focus on brain development. And we all know the brain is developing until about 25 years old, but we don't focus on that enough, you know, and I tell the kids, your brain is everything. You know, all of your dreams, all of your talents, all of your intelligence are in chemicals in your brain. Drugs and alcohol are substances you put in your body to change how the brain works. And science is discovering that if you're using drugs and alcohol while your brain is developing, you're going to change the brain development. And we have science to back it up. These are images that show brain scans of blood flow in the brain. And on top, we see somebody not using substances, and we see nice, even, smooth blood flow. But if you go around the diagram, we see people under the influence of marijuana, cigarettes, opioids, cocaine, alcohol, and meth. And those dark areas in this image aren't dead brain. The people using the substances have changed the blood flow, and those dark areas are zones without blood flow. So those parts of their brains aren't working. And I talk about this image because that 17-year-old can't see that damage. The 17-year-old can't see the changes inside his or her brain. And if we ask a young person in America who's 17 years old, are you harming yourself using drugs? They're going to laugh and go, no, because they think the question's ridiculous. But I'll point out that this 17-year-old's been using marijuana for 4 years, which means those same zones of his brain that aren't getting blood to work, they're not getting blood to grow. And I found these images to be very, very, very powerful in front of our youth audiences because they've never considered that they might be damaging their brains. And then I talk extensively about social media and the phones and depression and the reality that the kids live in. And I won't do that today, but it's very, very important when we're talking about drug prevention to make the connection to social media, the messaging, and the anxiety and depression and loneliness and lack of connection in our kids. And I talk about the other social problems. And this one is horrible, horrible. In the United States, we have hundreds of thousands of babies born every year damaged because their mothers use drugs and alcohol. And I point out that those mothers know they're harming their babies, but they don't want to stop using the substances, either because they enjoy it or because they're addicted and they're afraid of withdrawal sickness. And so I show the kids this video of what that looks like.
A crying baby is always unsettling. And it's even worse when you know the baby, like this little girl, just days old, is in pain. Her jittery shakes and her shrill cry are very distinctive, and they last for days. Doctors know exactly what's to blame.
Heroin.
That video is a few years old. Today, she would be saying fentanyl, fentanyl, fentanyl. But I show you that video because that's the intensity of my program. I get kids crying in my program. I get kids walking out of my program. And we use the term trigger. I don't know if you use it where you are, but when we upset somebody emotionally, we call it triggering. And some schools who resist my work say, Rocky, we can't have you come in because you might trigger some of our students. And my response is, if I don't trigger every student, then I failed. If I can show the kids what's going on in society around them, and they're not touched emotionally, then I've failed. And so that's interesting. I mean, there are schools who absolutely love my work. They think it's absolutely necessary to message the way I message. And there's other schools who completely reject how I message. Who else gets hurt? This little boy in America is in the backseat of his car with his dad and the dad's girlfriend. The adults inject heroin in the car in front of the kid and drive around. Sadly, during that day, the woman started to overdose, so she passed out. Her boyfriend panicked, tried to drive to the hospital to save her life when he passed out from his overdose. And that vehicle went out of control, almost crashed, and this is what the police found. And that little baby boy, 4 years old, sitting in the back seat, thinks his father's dead, thinks the girlfriend's dead. You see the police officer's arm coming in the window. That little boy's in a nightmare. I think we could all agree that's a pretty severe nightmare for that child. And yet when we look on his face, we don't see him reacting. He's just sitting there. And that's impossible. And yet it's real, it's right there. And I've consulted with many child development experts, and they agree with me. He's not reacting because he's used to it. This is his normal reality. And you know, this got lots of attention because it happened in public, but I asked my student audiences to think about how often did this happen wherever it was that little boy lived, where no one gave him food or nurture or love at 4 years old. Who is he going to be at 14? Who is he going to be at 24? And I tell the kids, I'm fighting for those little boys and girls through my work, and I need help. And I tell my student audiences, if you want to help, you don't have to become a DEA agent. All I need you to do is say no thank you the next time somebody offers you drugs. I just want the kids to make a personal decision to not find out what the drugs do to them. And I show pictures of smuggling. This is a case of mine. A family attached the drug heroin to their 1-year-old baby, his little body, to smuggle it from Mexico to the United States. And I point out to the kids, the drug dealers don't care about you. I mean, if this family cared so little about the welfare of their baby smuggling the drugs, how much would they care about, somebody who hurts himself on the drug? And of course, the answer is zero. And I talk about the violence in Mexico, and I talk about how American drug users are financing violence across the planet. And that is something that my society is not willing to recognize. It is really, really confusing to me. At times I get very angry that American society does not want to recognize that it's the American drug user that's financing violence across the planet. So these are pictures of my work. That's 2,000 students in a high school in San Diego. The teacher that took this picture said he's never seen those kids off their phones. And I wish I could say that's because I'm such a beautiful and eloquent presenter. I think it's because they see me as a credible presenter on this topic. And then these are pictures of some of my audiences around the world. And these are spontaneous pictures at the end of my presentations. And it fascinates me because it doesn't matter where I go. The kids listen and they react. And I ask them at the end, did they shout, I choose my future, or yo elijo mi futuro? And they do. When I wanted to teach in Tijuana, it was 2018. We had President Trump, we had the wall, a lot of big political issues between the United States and Mexico. And when I said I wanted to teach in Mexico, people thought I was crazy. But I got a man to loan me a gymnasium, and 2 universities sent 1,200 students from the universities. And I have a picture of them at the end cheering because they're tired of living in the violence caused by American drug users. So I love my work. I have an absolutely fantastic job, and I keep going wherever I'm invited. And I've been told that this year I may be going to Thailand. So I'm very excited about the possibility of teaching in schools in Thailand. When I was in Ghana, just before COVID, I walked into this auditorium and I said, uh-oh, to myself, because I had these 300 little girls staring at me silently. And I thought, how is this going to connect with these girls? And no one really expected it to go well. And when I was done, these girls mobbed me. They mobbed me. They were joyful with the message. And the drug problem in Ghana is very different from the drug problem in the United States. What's not different is the suffering. What's not different is the pain that these kids live in. And I think that's the secret of this messaging. It's universal. And the consequences of drug use are the same all across the planet. These young soldiers in San Diego, I was worried these tough young military men wouldn't resonate with my message. And yet look at that picture. And I found out that half of these young men joined the Marine Corps to escape from problems where they grew up. One of the young men in this picture lost 6 friends who died in high school from drug abuse. And then this is a youth prison in San Diego. And when I started teaching, these kids were hateful to me. They were cursing at me. They were making bad gestures to me, and nobody stopped them. I mean, even the guards, these kids were 15, 16 years old, living in prison for violent crimes. And even the guards had given up on them, but I didn't. And even though their verbal abuse continued for almost all of my presentation, by not quitting on them, something miraculous happened. And when I was done, they all realized what I'm trying to do is prevent the trauma that they grew up in. They finally realized through my teaching that the trauma that they suffered as children, the trauma that led to them being in prison at 15, was all connected with drug abuse. And I said to these young men who respect nobody, I said, look, if you like my program and you want to show support, will you stand for a picture? So these young guys, an hour before this picture, they were cursing at me hatefully. At the end of my program, chose to stand and show respect. And I'm very proud of that, because if I can reach these angry, cynical, wounded young men in prison, I'm optimistic that I'm reaching some of the kids in our normal schools. Sadly, schools in California are letting me teach now down to 10 and 11-year-olds. That's new. I'm happy about it, and I'm sad about it, because schools letting me teach my program, asking me to teach my program to 10 and 11-year-olds is because schools are aware that's when drug abuse is starting. And yet too many people in society in America think that that's too young. But, you know, I go where I want. I'm where I'm wanted. This is 1,500 13-year-olds in Northern California last year. I'm going back up to teaching this community next week. 1, 2, 3. Now, I can't measure the long-term benefit of my work. Hopefully there is some long-term benefit to my work, but I'm just an individual guy. I don't represent an institution, really. I'm just out teaching. And yet, if I get that kind of engagement from these young kids after my session, then they've learned something. They've listened, and they're all leaving. Every single one of these kids leaves my assemblies better informed about drugs than when they came in. This is at a high school in Puebla, Mexico. And I spoke to these poor kids for 2 hours straight in my broken Spanish. And at the end of my presentation, I said, hey, if you thought this assembly was worth your time and you learned something, please raise your hand. Oops.
Si ustedes entendían esta conferencia y si ustedes creen que valía el tiempo, alza la mano, por favor. Wow, gracias. Muchas gracias a ustedes.
And then this was a high school in Northern California just a few months ago.
Who chooses your future?
And because I can't be everywhere, my school district created a video project, and I just yesterday finished recording the Spanish version of it. We have the series in English, but we're producing an identical series in Spanish. It's free. There's no cost. There's no registration. It's on our website. And in just a few slides, I'll give you the link. These are the 6 topic areas. So I took my single session program and I broke it into 6 chapters. Number 1, the overall drug picture. Number 2, the mental health consequences. Number 3, how your own brain develops and can be damaged by drug abuse. And then number 4, about different types of drugs. 5, vaping, THC, and the last one about fentanyl. And I'm just going to show you a few seconds of the video to show you how we created these videos.
History now with marijuana. Same thing. Nobody dies of one puff, but vaping can have a lot more nicotine than tobacco cigarettes. People think, oh, it's just vaping. As an emergency physician, I could tell you that last week we had a 17-year-old who was just vaping who ended up in the ICU in a coma. I think the best way to deal with kids is to be honest. Not everybody who uses marijuana is going to get psychosis or schizophrenia, but it's a risk. Not everybody who smokes cigarettes is going to get lung cancer or emphysema, but it's a risk. I'm not there to tell people don't use drugs. I'm there that you should know about drugs and hopefully make this decision to protect your brain.
Trying to convince you that the vaping of nicotine or using marijuana is dangerous is not an easy job. because you've been told thousands of times by giant corporations, by celebrities, and by so many others that it's not dangerous. You've been told that vapes are just fun and have no harmful effects. They tell you that marijuana is, quote, natural, that it will make you better and more creative people. Many of you have tried it, and many of you live in environments where using it may seem normal. Because of that, you might think I'm making up this harm or even lying about this information that marijuana damages young people. But if you think I'm making up this information and you think I'm lying to you, I have a simple challenge for you. Prove me wrong. Do a Google search for teen brain damage marijuana and read some of the scientific articles you're going to find. That science will show you that the younger you are when you use marijuana, the more likely you are to harm yourself. However, if you read that science and you still choose to believe that marijuana is not harmful for you, that's your choice. But at least it will be an informed choice. In our final chapter, we'll discuss fentanyl. Remember, none of us knows what drugs will do to us before we start. You choose your futures.
So, how we message matters, right? Not every presentation is the same. There are actually a lot of people who think that what I do is not valid. I went to the Plan Colombo course a few years ago, and in their manual, they say that my type of work doesn't have value and that you need to use bigger sessions. Well, the problem is that many schools aren't open to the bigger sessions. I have to fight to get an hour from a school. So I agree that our kids deserve multiple session programs. Our kids deserve something that's much, much better than what I can do. But I do argue that what I do, or people that do work like mine, what we're doing is better than doing nothing. And that's what I'm trying to get. I want you to win you over. I want you to understand that if your schools aren't doing anything, that there are resources like me who will at least give the kids some information and some understandings. I'm not here trying to sell anything. I give away my work. I'll give away my work to all of you. Those videos are free. It's my life's mission to make sure that every kid across the planet is warned about drugs. And even when they're warned, many will still make the bad choices, but at least we will have warned them. And this is just from Friday. This is just a couple days ago. I was teaching at a university in Oaxaca, Mexico, and it was a very long 3.5-hour session. I was the second speaker of 4. And yet when we finished, the kids gave me this beautiful gift. They were chanting my name when I was done. And as amazing as that is for me personally, it's very powerful for me, because if they're chanting my name, that means they found value in the message, right? That they somehow identified with the message that I'm bringing to them. And then I've done some surveys, not often, and I need to do more, but I surveyed 1,500 high school students in San Diego, and their reactions were wonderful. And I asked the kids, was this presentation worth your time? And 85% said yes. And then the second question I asked was, after this presentation, do you think you are less likely, no change, more likely to use drugs? And 65% said they felt less likely to use drugs. And when I was in Guatemala, the reaction was even better. I mean, that's incredible. Almost 94% of the Guatemalan high school kids said they felt they'd learned something. And I'm very proud of my work. I've taken this teaching message all across the globe to very, very different cultures and places, and it resonates. So there's something about it that works. And if you want to look at these resources, those videos are at that website at the top, the sdcoe.net/ichoose. There's my email and my website. If you want my PowerPoint, if you want all of my teaching materials, I'll send them to you. When I finish here, I'll put my information in the chat for you as well.
Thank you very much, Rocky, for that wonderful presentation. So I think that a lot of people actually resonates with you in wanting to do something, right? So because there's not so many programs available that we can actually do for school, and a lot of people were saying about how it's costly, the feasibility of it. But what I like about what you said is that there are different ways to measure like the effects of drugs. So there are a lot of measurement that's available in terms how to measure our problems and challenges as well as our successes. And I think that for most schools, like we might not actually have the research, but we actually have the data. So if you just collect that data and then you partner with someone, I'm pretty sure that there will be that we can actually start building on it. So like when we talked about evidence-based practices, this always starts with research. And I know that not everyone has a research culture coming from a third world country, right? So, but we have the information that's needed and we can work on it. Okay, so there are notice there there's a question here, but it's I think it's a little bit more pharmacology about the use of jet fuel as drugs the way that they do it in Kenya. So do we have do you
Yeah,
have any
so
information about
unfortunately,
it?
I don't have time to talk about, if I get an hour, I don't have time to talk about all of the drugs people are using. And again, what I'm going at is more why. My speech is really a motivational speech. I try to get the kids to respect themselves and to understand that they have the power of choice. And I'm hoping that if I can do that successfully, they will be less likely to use anything, whether it's marijuana or jet fuel or an inhalant or fentanyl. But yeah, sadly, a limitation of a single session is I can't talk about everything that's relevant to those kids. So I focus on what I believe to be the core motivational issues.
Oh, which is empowerment, right? So children have a choice, not just saying that don't use drugs because we know it doesn't work, but actually like, and I like what you have mentioned about the video that proved me wrong. I think like for children, because like they like challenges and we cannot actually give them information that's not true because they are more tech savvy than us. So like if fear-based approach no longer works because like like they would just Google it. They are better than us in searching for information. So one way, like when you encourage them to search information and then they find it out for themselves, I think that there's a value to that. Are there any other questions that you guys wanted to share as we have 4 minutes, so we still have information. And also in the chat box, there are additional resources on information on school-based prevention. I think one of my other question is that how are you able to sort of like mobilize the school in terms of
Oh,
like attendance, partnership? I think maybe that's one of the things that our participants would like to know.
yeah, getting into schools is difficult. People running the schools, they don't think it's their problem. In America, many people don't believe in prevention education, sadly. And many school administrators think that if they have a drug presentation, that somehow they're sending a message that they have a drug problem. And my argument is every school in the world has a drug problem because society has a drug problem. So sadly, getting into schools is still very difficult. But that's an advantage because many schools are not willing to give up 6 or 12 hours, but they are willing to give up an hour, or they are willing to give up 90 minutes. So that's, again, as we finish today, that's what I want you to please think about that. Even if you doubt the benefit of what I'm doing, and there are many limitations to what I'm doing, it's better than nothing. So if you can get that school to agree to give you an hour, take it. Take it. Get the kids the information that they need, they deserve to have. And hopefully, look, I hope to be put out of work. I want to be put out of work. I want my government to say, Rocky, go away. We've got this wonderful 6-session, 12-session program that we're going to bring to our kids. But we're not close to that yet. And so it's a struggle. Like I said, I'm so proud to have been able to go all the places that I go. I'm so proud to be here with you today sharing. And I want to be a resource. And I also, I'm not being paid for this webinar. And if any of you listening would like me to do a webinar for you and your community, let me know. Again, send me an email. I can't keep track. If you don't email me, I won't be able to keep track of it. But if you would like a presentation like this, or if you would like me to do one towards students, I will do a student presentation for you virtually. and be happy to do so.
Okay, so they have Rocky's email address is actually in the chat box, as well as the other resources. Please copy it so that you can send him a message. And I like what you like. My thought is like immediately like the 12-step program, like one day at a time. So in this case, if there are still no comprehensive program, which a lot of the schools do not have, like again, we were talking about resources and actually starting it small. So like I think that's your foot in the door approach, right? Start with a 60 to 90-minute presentation, and then you could actually start building it from there.
Yeah, and what I
So-
do, I've been told by the experts that what I do is part of any comprehensive program will do what I do. I'm just trying to do it outside of a comprehensive program. So Lawrence asked a question about what happens to kids born with addiction. Yeah, so when the kids are born addicted, we have to give them other drugs for weeks or months to try to get them off the addiction to the street drugs. And sadly, many of those children are damaged and hurt, and they're going to be at greater risk for addiction. They have emotional challenges in life. So yeah, it's one of the great tragedies that my society, and I think probably many of yours, are not putting adequate emphasis on the babies who are being born drug damaged. And we don't even talk about it here. I discovered that problem 12 years ago. It made me angry. And yet, 13 years later, I still don't see our country doing anything about it.
So thank you so much. Just a quick note about this. So babies are not really like sort of addicted, but they're suffering from what you were saying. Like there's an effect of substances, of drugs in their system, and they have to be weaned off of it. So they're showing tolerance and withdrawal symptoms, and because of that, sadly, they will have lifelong difficulties, maybe in terms of cognitive deficits, neurodevelopmental, as well as physical health. So those are the things that is a reality. But sadly, as you said, so this has been happening for, I would say, decades now, right? This is, and culture is transitioning. Like all of us from different nations will have different types of drugs. Maybe like opioids is not a problem in your country, but then there's another substance that actually have like this effect. So again, Rocky, we thank you for spending your time with us and for sharing your information. We appreciate what your efforts and like being here and like providing us with the adequate resources. Again, everyone. So on behalf of ICU DDR, to our participants, I know that for some of you it's in the evening, to my Asian community. So thank you for being here on behalf of ICU DDR. We thank you everyone, and feel free to register to our other events for the upcoming months. So, and if you don't have a mail, if you're not a member of our mailing list, please join ICU DDR. You can join as individual members. So Carly provided the link, and we hope to see you again in our next event. So
And
bye, and have a good
thank you
evening,
all.
good day.
Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.
Thank you,
Rocky.
Rocky.
Bye bye.